We all start with one grand idea, the central concept of the world that we've created. That's the true joy of being a game master or a dungeon master, the fundament of your world, the question at the heart of the cosmos. You've dipped your hands into the waters of creation, and now you can start to dive deeper. So, how to go about creating your D&D lore? Welcome to the Red Quills. In our last episode, we delved into the fundamentals of world building, and today we'll explore an essential aspect of any fantasy setting, the lore. We'll show you how to create a rich backstory for your world and how to visualize it with a special project, a weathered handout map. This map will not only guide your players on a larger quest, but also immerse them in the history and the culture of your world. I personally find maps the best tools to use to flesh out your world building and to help explain it in a simple format. After all, isn't a picture worth 1,000 words? If you do it well and consider all of the details that you're adding in, you'll end up with a product that implies answers to questions you never even considered. Now, this map creation method is also a great tool to make your quests more fun and immersive by giving them handouts. Having something like this to give to your players will not only increase their enjoyment of the game, but it'll give them something to puzzle over and discuss. If you haven't made a map like this, I can only recommend it. So, follow along if you like, or get ready to start thinking about your lore. I'm going to start with weathering the paper and then using a combination of watercolor and acrylic paints to create the broad strokes, and finish with ink to crispen the details and add text. As we go through, I'll talk about how I create lore for my world, the questions that you should consider when creating, and how to make rules to help you to improvise the answers to lore questions as you go. So, let's talk about weathering. There are 1,000 ways to weather paper, and a lot of them depend on the thickness of the paper itself, the absorption, the ambient temperature, and not least what effect that you want to go for. I like to weather using tea, Earl Grey tea for preference, because I have a lot of this lying around for unrelated reasons. You simply stick the paper in a large metal or glass surface and drench in tea, allowing to dry over the course of several hours or days. Other maps I find tend not to work as well. Instant coffee can come out sticky if your consistency is wrong. Baking the map will get a great darkening of the edges, but will make the paper crispy. Vinegar smells and will make the paper weaker over time. In my opinion, tea is the best. I also wouldn't worry about crumpling it or folding it. It'll weaken the paper and make it more vulnerable to tearing and ripping. Besides, that will happen with use anyway. So, splash with tea and allow to dry. Do this first before drawing because you don't want your paint or ink to run. This map will look like an ancient relic, leading your players to various significant locations. Once the paper is dry, we can start designing our map. Let's talk about the lore. As always, creating your D&D lore begins with establishing a solid foundation. The first thing to begin with when you plan things out is a timeline in one form or another. It doesn't necessarily need to be such an obvious method of history keeping, but you will need to create your history. A well-crafted timeline helps you to organize your thoughts and ensures that your world has depth and coherence. In this section, we'll explore 3 key timelines. What really happened, which your world will call history. What they say happened, which they'll call legend, and what should have happened. This is for you, and is the past's relevance to the present. Strictly speaking, you only really need the first. But if you're fleshing things out and you want to take your world from level 1 to level 20, then you need to think outside the box. Doing things simply will get the job done simply, and if you want something done well, you need to be the one to do it well. So, let's talk about the 3 different kinds of timeline. The cornerstone of any great lore is its true history. This is where you detail the actual events that have shaped your world. Consider major milestones like the rise and falls of empires, significant battles, the discovery of new lands, and the development of cultures and technologies. This timeline should be thorough and factual, serving as the backbone for your world's lore. I always begin with the creation of the world. You don't need to give all of the details in the timeline itself, or even confirm that the world was created at any point, just because it's the natural starting point for the telling of your story. Then I break the timeline up into ages of development, agriculture, travel, coins, smithing, sailing, etc. Then you can add the points that you're eager to talk about, the battles, the defeats, the triumphs, migrations, and all of that. But when making a sandwich, Don't forget to butter the bread before you put the filling in. Next, we'll delve into the legends, the stories passed down through generations. These tales might be exaggerated or romanticized versions of historical events, often infused with myth and magic. Legends add a sense of mystery and wonder to your world, and they provide depth and color to its history. Think about heroes, monsters, and miracles that have become a part of cultural fabric. These are critical to creating a world that feels like it exists even when your players aren't exploring it. It's also a very handy tool to improvise quest lines later. Writing stories or songs or fables can seem daunting to begin with, but even a few lines to remind you of what the common folk think happened is a great writing tool. Divide your timeline into ages of myth, ages of heroes, of war, of magic or high knowledge, marked by periods of worship or disaster. It's always fun to move history around to fit into the legend's timeline, or have points in legends that didn't really happen in history. It happens in our world all the time, and the dissonance can create some great plot threads. Finally, consider the timeline of what should have happened. The idealized version of history is seen by different factions within your world. This perspective highlights how the biases and desires of various groups reveals their conflicts and their aspirations. It helps us to understand how different people view their past and what they believe the future should look like. This timeline can inform the motivations of characters and the actions of factions within your game, but more importantly, it's for you. When you look at what really happened and ask yourself, as creator, what should have happened, it can give you such a rich soil to plant quests in the modern day. For instance, a battle took place 1,000 years ago, and the wrong side won. In the long term, it could even out. But there was a reason that it should have happened and didn't. There's an imbalance that needs to be altered in the present day. By creating these 3 timelines, you can ensure that your world has a rich, layered history that can inform your storytelling and gameplay. Now let's move on to bringing this history to life through the conflicts that have shaped your world. Creating a rich and engaging world isn't just about history and legends, it's also about the conflicts that shape its present and future. Conflict drives the story forward and gives your players something to engage with and resolve. And in this section, we'll explore the 3 key types of conflict. Those focused on a figure, on fighting between peoples, and the idea that there are 2 sides to every fight. A single influential figure can be the catalyst for major events in your world. This could be a tyrannical ruler, a legendary hero, or a powerful mage whose actions have far-reaching consequences. When creating such a figure, think about their motivations, their rise to power, their impact on the world. How did they come to be in their position? What are their goals? And how did their actions create conflict within the world? Consider a despotic king who seeks to expand his empire at any cost. His ambition leads to wars and rebellions and a strained economy. Your players might find themselves opposing him, supporting a rebellion, or perhaps trying to understand and mitigate the reasons behind his harsh rule. The kind of conflict can be deeply personal and can drive a compelling narrative depending on your character's backstories and interests. I'm going to write one for this map. We'll call him the Sunderking. His true name has been wiped from history, and long ago he led a rebellion to free the human population from enslavement by a Yuan-Ti empire. He was beloved, a hero, and after conflicts that lasted decades, he finally succeeded in driving his enemy from their lands and toppling their cities. But it wasn't enough. The Sunderking became obsessed with protecting his people at any cost. He slaughtered men, women, and children, burned cities to the ground. When he heard that the Yuan-Ti had an oracle that could read the future, he hunted her down and drank her blood to secure a vision of his own. What he saw only made the madness deepen. He pursued power, made a pact with a dark god, and became a lich. Eventually, he was deposed by his own people. The next type of conflict involves entire groups or cultures clashing with one another. This could be 2 nations at war, rival city-states, or even different races or species with historical animosities. These conflicts are often rooted in long-standing issues such as territorial disputes, cultural differences, or resource scarcity. And when crafting this type of conflict, think about the history between the groups. What events led to the current animosity? Are there efforts for peace, or are things spiraling towards total war? This type of conflict can provide a broad canvas for your storytelling. It allows players to navigate complex political landscapes, forge alliances, perhaps even broker peace. Take the war between the Yuan-Ti and the humans in this map. The current Kingdom of Endon is human-dominated, and its history began in the bloodshed of an initial slave revolt. They have a hereditary hatred of the Yuan-Ti and their empire, the Sthesic Vrasa, which stems from the injustices that were inflicted upon them. But the Sthesic Yuan-Ti are not all gone. They were driven underground. All hope of escape was taken from them, and they've been forced to eke out a living for centuries in the dark places of the kingdom. They're killed on sight. They are figures in every scary story told to children, and so they too have a hereditary hatred of the Kingdom of Endon and of humans, which stems from the injustices which have been inflicted upon them. Which brings us to the next point. Remember that each conflict has multiple perspectives. It's rarely a case of pure good versus pure evil. Each side will have its own justifications, grievances, and goals. This nuance adds depth to the world and makes the conflicts more engaging and realistic. Encourage your players to see shades of grey. Maybe the orcs raiding the human settlements are driven by famine and desperation and not just bloodshed. Perhaps the rebels fighting the empire have notable intentions but questionable methods. By fleshing out both sides of a conflict, you give your players the chance to make meaningful choices and understand the complexities of the world. The Sthesic and the Endonians are an example of this. Once upon a time, it may have been simple to determine who was right and who was wrong. But war has a way of making everyone dirtier by fighting in it. Both sides have noble heroes and terrible murderers, and possibly these are the same figures. And to bring these conflicts into life, reintegrate them into your lore and your maps. Mark significant battle sites, contested borders, places of historical importance. Use your weathered map to show the scars of past wars and current flashpoints. This visual representation can help immerse your players in the ongoing struggles and make your world feel alive. By focusing on key figures and group conflicts and the multiple sides of every story, you can create a dynamic and engaging world. Your players will find themselves drawn into the drama and excitement of these conflicts, making their adventures all the more memorable. This map has an added challenge. It was made during the reign of the Sunderking, after the fall of the Sthesic Vrasa, so a human made it who hates the Yuan-Ti. And I need to write that into the map and yet make it clear to the players that this is an opinion and not fact, so that they get to choose who was right and who was wrong. But the map shows the places in the past that held answers and may yet still hold answers. It promises truth but delivers opinions. There are contradictions, and if they go to these locations to investigate, they may yet find answers. That's what we're trying to go for here. As we move into the intricacies of your world, it's time to expand beyond the central conflicts in the history. This section focuses on the branches and twigs of your world's lore, the central systems, the formative threads, and the recurring themes that weave through the tapestry of your creation. These elements add layers of complexity and cohesion, and they make your world feel alive and interconnected. And the important thing to remember is they will exist whether you work on them or not. They are informed by your perception of the world and your opinion of what makes the world alive. So if you don't sit down and think it through, they'll still exist. But being aware of them allows you to flesh them out and use them to your advantage, and also change things up occasionally. But before we move on, if you think that this resource is coming in useful to you, you can check out our page in which we have dozens of other videos and more specific maps and charts. And you can also, if you want to, become a member of the Red Quills on YouTube or Patreon. You can access our mapmaking Discord. We have exclusive Q&A sessions. You can vote on upcoming topics and talk about topics on our boards. And you can have high quality copies of the maps that I make for these videos, as well as the downloads for the Lore Archive series. Speaking of, this video is a part of a 6-part series in which we'll be exploring the basics that you'll need in order to create the maps that you'll be proud of and that you can use to best effect in your own fantasy world, whether they're written or played or told. And additionally, we'll be following along with the Lore Archive series, in which we'll be exploring some lore made specifically about these settings. And that is particularly relevant for this video. But getting back to it, every world operates on a set of fundamental systems that governs its societies and cultures. Now, these systems could be political or economic or religious or magical. Defining these central systems helps to create a framework for how your world functions and how its inhabitants interact with each other and their environment. They are similar to the ideas that we discussed in the previous video about the 3 layers of your world. So think about the political structure of your world. Is it a monarchy, a republic, or a theocracy? How do different regions govern themselves, and what are the relationships between these governing bodies? Similarly, consider economic systems. What resources are valuable? How are they traded? Are there guilds and markets and trade routes that dominate commerce? What are the central assumptions throughout your world? I'm using the past to inform the present, which lends itself to questions. The kings of Endon claim a direct descent from the Sunderking, and the institution of hereditary monarchy has come from him. It hasn't been reformed in 1,000 years, which begs the question, if the Sunderking was such a divisive figure, why hasn't it changed? Shouldn't it? Formative threads are the key events and cultures and traditions that shape the identity of your world. They run through history and daily life of your world. They influence its development and beliefs of its inhabitants, and they are offshoots of the central systems. They're how they change slightly according to the different assumptions through your world. By identifying these threads, you can create a sense of continuity and depth. For instance, consider cultural traditions that have endured through the ages. What festivals and rituals and customs are celebrated? How do these traditions reflect the history and value of the world? Because culture stems from history. It is history altered. Additionally, think about the key events that have left a lasting impact. These could be wars or plagues or discoveries or revolutions that have shaped the collective memory of your world's inhabitants. In our example, the annual Remembrance Festival in Endon commemorates the fall of the Sthesic Rasa and the rise of human freedom. And the festival is marked by reenactments and feasts and rituals that honor the ancestors who fought for liberation. And that's great. That's a formative thread that has branched off from the main central system. The central system is what actually happened, the war. The formative thread that comes off is how they react to that, how they change that. Such formative threads help to create a rich cultural tapestry that players can explore and engage with. And more importantly, they can leave clues to facts that the story has forgotten, a connection between the history and the legend. In this case, for instance, the main festival is held at the ruins of Tol Fallant in northern Endon. The main reenactment is of the Night of Blood, when the Sthesic slavers killed the Endonian women and children as a deterrent to war. However, the map from the time and the ruins themselves don't show any slave population kept in Tol Fallant, and the date doesn't match historical records. In reality, the massacre was of Sthesic captives by Endonian soldiers, and the story was changed a few hundred years ago to make the Endonians look better. It's branched from the central system and altered the way that people see themselves. It's changed history in order to flesh out your world. Recurring themes are the last. They're the underlying motifs and the ideas that permeate your world. These themes can be moral or philosophical or symbolic. They provide a cohesive thread that ties together different elements of your lore. Identifying these themes helps to create a unified vision for your world. Think of them as the plot points that repeat themselves throughout different stories. Consider themes such as struggles for freedom or corruption of power or conflict between nature and civilization. How do they manifest in history and culture and conflicts of your world? They add the depth and resonance to the storytelling. They make your world more compelling and thought-provoking, and they crop up all the time in our own history and mythology. In the Kingdom of Endon, the recurring theme of liberation versus oppression is ever present. The history of slavery under the Sessik and the subsequent rise of the Sunderking reflect this theme, and even in the present day, tensions between the ruling class and the common folk and the remnants of the UNT echo this ongoing struggle for freedom and justice. And there's more to it than that. Individual events such as coronations or rebellions often pop up through history, and they continue this cycle over and over and over again throughout different concepts. To bring these elements to life, weave them into the narrative and the map, show how the central systems influence daily life and major events, illustrate the formative threads that weave themselves through cultural landmarks and festivals and historical sites, highlight recurring themes in the conflicts and choices that your players encounter. By fleshing out the branches and twigs of your world, you create a dynamic and immersive environment that feels real and lived in. Your players will appreciate the depth and coherence of your world, and their adventures will be enriched by the layers of history and culture and the meaning that you have built. And what's more, using that concept of central systems, formative threads, and recurring themes will allow them as people to begin to predict a pattern to history. And that's going to give them an edge in playing and allow them to enjoy the world that you've built even more for being able to predict what will happen, more or less. And with these elements in place, your world is ready to offer countless stories and adventures. So let's bring everything together and conclude our journey through the creation of this D&D lore. There you have it. A weathered, lore-rich map ready to lead your players on an unforgettable adventure. And remember, a great map is more than just geography. It's a gateway to stories, mysteries, and endless exploration. If you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified whenever we release new content, ensuring that you never miss an update. Also, don't forget to check out our page for other videos on specific map styles and techniques. As a member of the Red Quills, you'll gain access to exclusive Q&A sessions, topic boards, and high-quality copies of the maps created. Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll delve deeper into the aspects of world building, such as cultures, myths, and legends that'll make your world come alive. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Your support and engagement are what makes this channel possible, and I'm excited to see the incredible maps that you create. Until next time, happy map making.